Welcome to the Real Life Management Show, not podcast. This is Wayne Nance, the CEO of Real Life Management, author of Thin, Rich, and Happy and the 3-Minute Difference. And I'm joined by my sidekicks here, Derek Peters and Thomas Cain. Well, I've got to tell you guys something that I'm going to start doing on these shows. We're going to start talking about the stupidest thing I've ever heard for the week. So this week, let's talk about this guy called Bad Bunny. Now, today's show is not going to be about Bad Bunny, but I got to start with this because this is really stupid. Can you imagine when he was born, his daddy looked at his mother and said, "Hey, someday, honey, a boy's going to be somebody. People are going to pay thousands of dollars to come watch large men fall on each other at a football game. He's going to be called Bad Bunny, and he'll be performing some songs, and he'll be wearing a dress at the football game." Now, only in America can you have a Puerto Rican guy in a dress named Bad Bunny. I don't know why they didn't call him Easter Bunny, Funny Bunny, Fuzzy Bunny. But we certainly want to thank the NFL for their idea. What a great idea. So I just wanted to see if anybody out there, I know there's only 2 or 3 or 4 of you probably watching, but I'd love your comments. I'd love to hear what you think about Bad Bunny, because they've got to be proud of that boy. He finally has become somebody. And it'll be the first time I've ever seen a football game with a fella wearing a dress. So anyway, I wanted to make sure that we talked about something that doesn't make any sense, because this show is about attitudes, and boy, is that an attitude. We're going to have to give him the 3-minute survey, guys. See what you think about it. So now, if we could move on to something that makes a little more sense, not really. What I wanted to talk about today was, I mentioned before, I believe, that I spent 7 years around the world in Iraq and South Korea and Afghanistan and various and sundry places with the United States Army where there was wars going on between 2010 and 2017. Mainly in Iraq is where we had most of the activity at the time. And I was asked by some chaplains in the U.S. Army, would you allow us to give the survey and work with us on what it tells us about our soldiers? Little did I know, over 7 years, up until 2017, we would gather 75,000 surveys on soldiers around the world. And what we were looking for was under stress or pressure while in active service around the world. How was their attitude? On the particular subjects we were looking for was suicide and sexual assault and domestic violence. We were looking to see who was dangerous and who would hurt themselves or others, focusing on rape, abuse of women, and suicide. Boy, did we learn a lot. I ended up going to the Pentagon during this time. This was right about the end of Obama's period that he was in office. And I made a briefing to the Pentagon on what did we find out? 7 years. Now, I was very naive because I thought when we started working on this that the United States Army and the Pentagon wanted answers. I thought me and Real Life Management, that's what we were doing, was trying to find answers. In other words, who are these people that try to kill themselves? Who are these people that will rape somebody? Who are these people that are rape victims over and over? We wanted to find out, I thought. Now, guys, this was really interesting because at one point during that 7 years, I go do a briefing to the Pentagon, and I'm talking to the suicide and sexual assault people on the committee that was appointed. And I asked them when I got to the Pentagon, I said, what is President Obama's directive to you about everything we've been working on? Because I've got some information for you today. And they said, well, the directive from the president is not that we need to figure out what the problem is in terms of who and why and what. We are just to assess what the overall problem that we're facing. I said, now, wait a minute. I think that we already know what the problem is we're facing, or I wouldn't be working on it all these years. We know that the suicide rates are going up, and we know that the rates are going up in the military, not just the Army, even though it was the Army was where the most action was. So do we need to spend our time today talking about what we think the problem is, or do we need to talk specifically about solutions and identifying who these people are by attitude? They said, not really. So it's kind of like saying that we just went through a cold front here in Texas. It would be like saying, what is the problem that we're going to go through when we have a cold front? Well, what do y'all think? I think it's going to be cold. So for the government to tell me they were spending literally hundreds of billions in grant money and research, not with us, we were not getting much of it, but they were paying a lot of people and a lot of universities all this money with no answers. Now, during this time, after we finally started having some answers, we put 75,000 soldiers around the world in a database. They all took the survey. And in that database, we were sorting through the scores to see what scores kept coming up suicidal. What scores came up as rape victims? What scores came up as rapists? And we were seeing all this data. So when I went to the Pentagon to do the briefing, I said, we have enough data for you that we know a lot of what's going on. Let me tell you some things that are going on. The first thing we found was that 25.8% of the 75,000 people we surveyed should have never been recruited to the Army. 25+% shouldn't have been recruited. They already had problems when they were recruited. Now, the Army would like for you to believe, and all the propaganda, even to this day, that a lot of this is coming from PTSD. Well, what we found is that wasn't true. That most of these people had these problems before they were ever recruited. Their survey scores were showing it to us. As a matter of fact, many of them had never even seen battle. They weren't even on the front lines in combat, many of them, that were some of the worst cases. So PTSD was not the issue. And today they're still putting out that propaganda. The amount of suicides that they were reporting at the Pentagon and the Army at the time didn't even touch the real numbers. Didn't even touch the real numbers. So we were having all of these issues, and I told them that we knew that we already had certain divisions that were having problems and that were high risk, and there were one of those such divisions at Fort Hood at the time. Now you're going to find out later that that particular division that was having trouble is where the shooting came from, the last major shooting at Fort Hood. So what is my point? My point is that we like to give lip service at the Pentagon and the VA then and today. The numbers are even worse today than they were then. We like to give lip service that the problem is getting maybe a little better, but we don't even tell the real stats. I'll give you an example. I read just this week that the VA has been putting out that 22 suicides a day is what is coming out of the veterans. Now, that's not very good if it is 22. But some outside sources that did research into the numbers says they're closer to 44. They're still covering up the numbers to this day. Now, I think this is a big deal. Now, let's go back to the recruiting issue. It's a recruiting problem, and it still is. And I don't think the White House, I don't think the Congress, I don't think the veterans, I don't think a lot of people that are, quote, working on this have been told the truth. I don't really blame the president. I don't really blame everybody for it. I think that the Army especially has covered up a lot of these numbers over the years. And I don't think the briefings have ever been told true. to anybody yet. And that's why I'm bringing it up. So at the end of the day, we have some real issues in our country about telling the truth if you're the VA or you're the Army about how many people are being raped. I'll give you, or suicide. I read this last week, a study. The Army says it got about 6,900 or so rapes in the last year. Now, that's not really a good number if it was true, 6,900. Well, another outside source company that did audits on it say they think the number's closer to 73,000. More than 10 times what they're telling us. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up today is if we're going to let our daughters and sons serve in our military, we need to make sure they're protected. We need to make sure that we don't teach them how to use a gun if they already got problems before we recruit them. So we need to talk about recruiting issues. We need to talk about how we train them. We need to talk about how we're going to protect them. And we're not protecting them if we just cover up the numbers and don't even get honest with the numbers. Now, guys, before I go any further, do either one of y'all have a question or a comment about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to switch gears a little bit. One of the questions that I always get is what happened to Wayne Nance, or the founder of this company, that made him want to build a system to identify some of these propensities? So share a little bit of your personal story and background when you're developing this system, and kind of how you even transitioned into getting into the Army.
Well, first of all, it's a good question, and I don't mind telling the story because I want to be transparent. I went through a lot of depression. I was in the financial business before I really started real life management. I already had a career in the financial industry about 20 years. And I was very fortunate to have a good career. But as I said in my book, in the first chapter of my book, I had struggled with a lot of issues. I wasn't the best parent. I wasn't the best husband. I started drinking too much. I even started running up some credit card debt. I mean, there were things that I was doing, even though I looked successful on the outside. And unfortunately, many executives today, or national leaders or state leaders or whatever, top corporate executives, they put on an image that everything's great and they got it together. And I was one of those guys that the image looked good. I was on the school board in Texas. I was well thought of in the community, but I was struggling with these issues. And there was a point where I even considered suicide myself. I got to a really low point. As a matter of fact, it was one of those times in my life where Crown Royal was my best friend. And I went and checked in a hotel one afternoon, and I had full intentions of going ahead and doing it. Of course, I had to have some Crown Royal to get my nerve up. Yeah. And of course, you know, I had gone through a lot of depression. And so I understood, and I understand today, how you can get to that point. And one of the things that I will talk about suicide, and I know this is going to really rub some people the wrong way, and if it does, maybe it'll get your attention and not just get over it. But my point being is that the psychology community is still working with 1970 material. They have no idea what I'm talking about. They're putting everybody on medication, whether they're in the Army or not in the Army. And the psychologists are lost as a goose. We have unique research at Real Life Management that came out of those 7 years, and we know what kind of people commit suicide. Now, we're not God, and we're not trying to play God. So, you know, only God knows. But at the end of the day, we know what scores on the survey have the propensity for suicide. We know what scores have the propensity for rape. We know what scores of people who let their guard down and when rapes occur. We know who are the kind of people that do domestic violence. We know what kind of people scores have domestic violence done to them as the victims. But it was my own personal story that made me become interested in this. And then as I started working with the Army, it just became more and more of an interest to me and a passion for me. Yeah. I also had somebody in my family that was very close to me that was raped. And so at the end of the day, between some personal experiences and all the research, it became a real passion. Now, I know corporations are famous now for getting funding or nonprofits to have meetings and discussions and conferences on suicide. Well, that's all they're doing. They're having meetings and discussions and wasting time and money because we have the research. And the reason I know we have the research was at the time that I was working with the Army, we were called a sole source contract, meaning we were the only contractors that knew how to do what we did. And at one point, when one of the 4-star generals at Hood asked me to bid on doing some more work for him, I said that I would do it, but because I was sole source and already had many years there, they had to, quote, keep a level playing field, so it had to go out for bid. They went out for bid for 13 months around the world to every psychology and psychiatry firm, to every counseling firm, coaching company. And after 13 months from around the world, they come back and awarded us the bid. And they said, Wayne, your company gets the bid. Nobody knows how to do what y'all do. Nobody has the assessment tools. And quite frankly, the Army asked me, did I want to continue to do some more work at this time? But actually what happened after I turned the 13-month period, I turned the bid down. I walked away. And they went, what? You waited 13 months to bid on it? You bid on it? And you walked away? And I said, yeah. The reason I walked away was they were going to put me with a new commander that I was going to be working on the project with at Hood. And one of the things you got to understand about the Army is I call it the 12-month turnover group. Every 12 months, they give you a new commander, and you got to sell upstream or talk upstream to get them to buy into whatever you're doing. And quite frankly, they're not worried about suicide. They're not worried about sexual assault. And I did that for 7 years. I got tired of it. But one of the last things that really got to me is when I went to the Pentagon to do the briefing, I told them before I left the building that we had research that we felt that we knew where the next violence would come from. And I told them where it was going to come from. I told them that I didn't know for sure, but I suspected it would come from Fort Hood. And I even told them what group that I felt like it would come from. They didn't take it serious. And then later the shooting occurred one morning, and it was exactly the group that I told them that I was concerned about. So I was pretty fed up at that point. I was fed up because I knew they weren't serious. And unfortunately, they're still not serious. They're still not serious. They still don't put out the right numbers. Mm-hmm. The VA gives lip service. Where do you think the 25% that were issues in the military, what do you think they become once they serve their time? They become a what? A veteran. Mm-hmm. And then they're on our streets. How many times have we seen domestic shootings, mass shootings, where they said it was what? A veteran. A veteran. Yeah. Now, I'm not really blaming all the veterans. I have some great friends that are veterans, especially going all the way back to the Vietnam War. And of course, that group has not been treated well. That's another show for another day. Yeah. But my point being is that we've been covering up the truth. And I don't know if we're covering it up because we're just stupid, don't know any better, or that we don't want to know better. But I can tell you one thing, the numbers that are on rape today and suicide today are inaccurate. Mm-hmm. The Pentagon does not give you good numbers. The psychology community lost as a goose. Mm-hmm. Corporate America lost as a goose. We've got unique research that nobody has. It's still sitting in my desk. And I just want you to know this is really bothering me that this continues to go on. Y'all got a thought or a question?
Yeah, some of the stats we were talking about that are up and down in different places. I found a stat on the VA government site that talked about military sexual drama or trauma that was happening in women. Was 1 out of 3 women had some type of sexual trauma that happened. 1 in 50 men had something going on. If you look at those stats, how does stress, what is the stress level or the distress level of some of these attitude patterns that you saw in the military and how it impacted it?
Well, first of all, stress and distress is where bad things happen. In other words, whether you're in the military or you're not, your attitude under stress is where you start doing stupid stuff. Mm-hmm. You do your most dangerous stuff under distress. And one of the things that you don't know unless you take our survey, and I suggest if you're watching this, you go take a survey right away. But distress, my dad used to tell me, son, nothing good happens after midnight. Well, distress is where our after midnight is.
Yeah.
And the reason that we go to distress is our needs aren't met. Now, by 8 years old, I told you the last time we talked, our attitudes are developed. And then our belief system keeps working, and people keep working on it, whether they're the media, the church, the school, our best friends, whatever, the United States Army. It works on our belief system. And if our needs are not met, and we all have what we call primary and secondary needs. The first two letters of your scoring pattern are your primary and secondary needs. If those needs aren't met, eventually you move to stress. And then if they're not met over a long period of time, you go to distress. That's when the rapes occur. That's when murders occur. That's when suicide occurs. And let me give all of you people that think you understand suicide, you've read all of your textbooks and your papers, and your corporation and the military and the VA have had all these rah-rah sessions with you. Let me tell you two things you need to know. Suicides occur out of one of two reasons. When you get to distress, you're in distress because you can't control everything anymore. You're an attitude person that's always used to controlling everything, and you want to be in control of everything. And finally, your family, your friends, your co-workers, people you go to church with, they don't care about your stress, and they don't care about your control, and they just ignore you. They don't want to listen to you anymore. And so when you can't control things anymore, you give up. Pretty simple. I'm used to being in control, and life's not worth living. I can't control anything anymore. And boy, do we have some control freaks out there. Now let's flip the coin the other way. So it's a control issue. Now we've got the group that when they go to distress, they have never been in control of anything. They're the nicest person at church. They're the nicest person in the company. They're the nicest person in the family. Everybody takes advantage of them. Nobody respects them. Oh, and we even use the term bullying on the playground now. But you can be an adult and be bullied by your family, your friends, your co-workers. And it was the same, that group is the same ones that were on the playground probably being bullied. And so finally what you go, you know what? I can't get anybody to respect me. I can't get anybody to care about what I think. I'll show them. I'm going to take control. I've never been in control. I've let everybody else be in control. I wanted everybody else to be happy. And now I'm going to take control. And so in their distress, they're taking control. The first group was giving up control. This group is taking control. Now, it just so happens that our specialty at Real Life Management is our survey tells us where everybody is under distress. And our numeric value, our quote, artificial intelligence, tells us which group people fall into. And if you fall into one of those two groups, you're most likely going to either attempt suicide, be successful at suicide, or at least think about suicide. Now, isn't that interesting, guys, what I just told everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been proven time and time again to be the deepest, most accurate, fastest assessment ever created. You can't just pull people off the street to create something like this. What kind of team did it take? How long did it take you to put them together? And where did you even learn who you wanted to use?
Yeah, and one other thing I want to tell you about the Army. That 25.8% or so that we were talking about, almost 17% of our surveys when we looked at them said they had bad leadership. 17% of the leaders in the U.S. military were not good leaders. And most of them that weren't good leaders were not good leaders for one major reason. They were procrastinators who put things off and put decisions off because they didn't want to mess up their next promotion. They wanted to be politically correct, and they wanted to cover their rear end. So we found that 17% of Army leaders were not good. 25% of the other group were not very good soldiers. Do you see we had a little bit of a recruiting problem here?
Absolutely.
And we still have it. See, we're not going to solve the suicide problem. We're not going to solve the problem of sexual assault in the military and VA until Washington decides it's time to clean up our recruiting program. So if the head of the Veterans Association or the head of the War Department or the President of the United States is interested in this, and I'm going to say they are. I'm not at all going to say in this broadcast that Donald Trump or the head of his War Department or the person he appointed over the VA, I'm not going to say that the new guys on the job don't care. I think they do care. I think they're naive. They don't know. They know there's a problem, but they haven't been told the truth by the Pentagon. Ever. They haven't been told that, hey, we got a recruiting problem. They haven't been told that we don't know how to train these people properly in these areas. They have a program they call the SHARK program that we reviewed, which was a joke, still is. They had some MIT trainers and people that were talking about all this stuff. They don't have a clue what they're doing. And so at the end of the day, I'm just telling it like it is. I believe that if I were Donald Trump today or the head of the VA or head of the War Department, if Pete's listening, I would say, hey, I believe you guys care. I believe you're good people. But I believe you inherited a mess, even going back to Donald Trump's first term, because I was working on this right before his first term, and he didn't know what a mess they had made. So Obama created or started that mess. Biden came in and kind of helped keep the mess going. And now we're having to clean up the mess. And this is not a political announcement.
Yeah.
This is not a political, it's just a fact of life. I was there. Yeah. We could have avoided the last shooting at Hood. I'm not going to call any names, but there were generals that knew about it. You can go back and see who the generals were at Hood at the time in charge. You can go back and look and see who was in charge of the group that was shot. I'm not going to call names, but they know who they are if they're listening or they see this broadcast. And I suggest that if you're one of those 3 people watching, you tell 3 more people about this.
Yeah.
This needs to be done because we need to protect your children. You need to protect your daughters and your husband, your boys that go to the military. And right now, the Marine Corps and the Army have the worst set of numbers. The best sets of numbers are the Navy and the Air Force, even though they've got some numbers. That's your best groups. And so I want people to understand 2 things. They are recruiting people into the service that already have problems, that we're blaming the Army or the Marine Corps or whatever for. They don't get the blame other than they shouldn't have recruited them. Then we teach them how to use a gun. That's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then we don't prepare them for after military, and then we dump them back on the streets. So if you want to solve the problem, if you say, what's the solution, Wayne? It's a very simple solution. We get serious and we tell the Pentagon, stop covering up your numbers. Your numbers aren't right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell us the truth. And let's get a better recruiting program. Let's make sure that we don't recruit problems and then later blame PTSD or something else as a blame. There's going to be a few PTSDs over the issue, but for the most part, these people had problems before we recruited them. Mm-hmm. And we have the stats on over 75,000 soldiers as of 2017 or so when I left there. And the numbers haven't gotten better, gotten worse. So who are we kidding? And so all of you psychologists and companies talking about suicide, you do not know what you're talking about. If you think I'm being arrogant, if you think I'm being narcissistic, that we know, I'm sorry, you can get over it. I was in the trenches 24 hours a day. Back in the day when we called it Skyping. We called it Skyping. I'd be in Iraq at 3 in the morning Skyping with Army officers trying to figure out exactly what was going on with soldiers in real time. And after I trained 52 officers around the world, chaplains and first sergeants, we trained 52 officers to go and take this material and surveys and training material we developed called Operation 3 Minute all over the world. And after the 7 years, I had them give me stats back about accuracy. And they said with the suicides and the issues they had to work on and rape and domestic violence, that they found out that our assessment tool, the 3 Minute Survey, was 92% accurate around the world. Mm-hmm. That ain't bad. No. I'll take 92% all day. That's not my stat. And I presented these numbers to the Pentagon. So if the Pentagon ever says they never heard of me or heard of what we're talking about, that ain't true either. I walked in with a book. I handed every one of them on their desk.
We can't believe everything they say, Wayne?
No.
What? It's our government. We're supposed to trust them, right?
Now, I know that right now we're building a following, and, the guys tell me, hey, Wayne, we had 150 people look at it. We had 1,000. We had 200. I don't care. I'm just telling it like it is when we do these broadcasts. And I thought this was an important broadcast to have. Y'all know it as a podcast, but I'm still not accepting that. And I know there's nobody watching this that has a clue about what I'm talking about today, but I'm hoping that you become a little educated about the truth. And we're going to give everybody that's in office today a fair chance that they cared. They just didn't know before today. And I've still got it in my desk if anybody's interested in what these patterns look like. And I would suggest anybody watching this podcast, if you haven't taken our 3-minute survey, go take our 3-minute survey. Matter of fact, Bad Bunny, I'd like to see your score. I want to know what a fella that gets in a dress at a football game look like on the survey. Guys, any other comments? I've got a couple more I want to make, but y'all ain't got more questions about this.
I think it's important to point out the Strong Bonds conference that was done during the military work. They called themselves training before real life management, MRTs.
Yes.
And y'all did an MRT versus real life management. What's your thoughts on that and the results that came out of that?
Well, the Army likes to have names like Strong Bonds or Sharp or whatever. These are all programs that they tie to what they call resilience. That's still a big term in the military. Resilience just means bad behavior, okay? Now, they can have any name they want to put on it, but these are all programs that are tied. And the MRT trainers were people that were selected around the world for the Army and put through certain training dealing with suicide, sexual assault, domestic violence, leadership, whatever. But the MRT training probably wasn't very good. Now, that doesn't mean the MRT people that were the trainers were bad people. It meant that they were given bad training. I mean, it's like a computer. Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And so the Army just did not have good programs. They were trying a little bit of everything. And when we come along with the survey, we blew a lot of people's skirt up. I'll tell you that, because they're going, what do you mean? I said, well, in 3 minutes, I'm going to tell you if this person has got a propensity for certain issues. And not only that, but we're going to go ahead and develop you a training program to deal with domestic violence, to deal with sexual assault, to deal with suicide, to deal with bad leadership. And we developed it. We put it on video. We put it on audio. Now, they have all these new terms now in the last few years. I'll let y'all figure out what term you want to put on it. But if you wanted to see it, listen to it, or have live training, we developed a program that could be transferable to any country around the world. As a matter of fact, I was getting commanders from South Korea and other countries in Kuwait where we had done training using some of our 52 officers, and they were telling us how good it had worked and how it was superior to MRT trainings and the Strong Bonds. The Strong Bonds was just a group of programs that the Army had adopted. And so, I think there were a lot of good people in the United States military, and I think there are a lot of good people around the world, and I appreciate those people for protecting us. But at the end of the day, I know about 25% of them, I'm not sure they're protecting me. I'm not even sure they're protecting themselves at this point. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's time that we have a wake-up call and stop giving lip service to suicide or sexual assault. And by the way, right now, and I just read this week, active duty soldiers have 9 times more dying from suicide than combat. 9 times more than combat is suicide. We have a 9 times greater in the military to die from suicide than combat.
Wow.
What do y'all think about that?
That's crazy.
Oh, and let me give you a stat I wrote down here. For every 100,000 soldiers, let me just find this. For every 100,000 soldiers that we have some sort of death, 28% of them come out of suicide today. Now, does that sound like we're getting accurate information?
No, not at all.
No.
So tell a friend about this broadcast and tell them to see it. And then tell them to start asking questions if their kid's in the military about what are you doing to protect my kid. And then if your kids are wanting to go to the military, have a talk with them and make sure that your recruiter, you're having discussions about these issues. Not about you just get to have a cool uniform and a free meal and a gun and travel the world. Guys, what other thought do you have?
I want to point out, I had the privilege of being a part of one of your military trainings in Midlothian. And the leaders or those officers flew in from South Korea. Didn't have a clue who you were from Adam. In, 2 days? You had full training for 2 days. And I was in that meeting and I could see they had a connection with what you were teaching them in a level. They were sobbing, they were crying, they were very emotional, and they even shared coins with you as they give out. And some of those are on your back display. What are your thoughts from someone like that?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I'd forgotten about it, but it was a 5-day class. Mm-hmm. And the Army, as I was leaving the Army was shocked that I was walking away at Fort Hood when they offered me this pretty good sized contract. And I told them that I now knew, after that shooting had happened at Hood and everything where we said that we knew there were problems, I was fed up. And I told them I'm not taking the contract, I'm walking away from it. And so I got a call from the commander in South Korea about 2 weeks later. And he said, Wayne, I'm leaving my command in a few months, but he said, your suicide and rape prevention program education we've been using for the last couple of years with one of your top chaplain trainers in the Army. Now, these chaplains were all Army chaplains. He said, he's made a major difference using your program. Would you come to Korea, South Korea, and do training for my 30 officers? I have 30 officers that are aware of your program, but they need more depth. And I said, no, I won't. I said, I just walked away from the Army, told him I'm walking away. And he said, well, I really wish you would do this. And I said, well, I don't want to come to Korea. I said, that's a tough flight, tough recovery, and I don't even like some of the food. So I said, at the end of the day, I care about the officers, I care about these issues, but I said, I will do something for you. And he told me what his budget was, and I said, boy, that was weak. I said, United States military, can spend $1 million on one shell out of a cannon, that they've got. And I said, or a tank. And I think he said, well, we got $25,000 for you to train 30 soldiers. And I said, well, tell you what I'll do. I said, if you'll bring them to Midlothian, Texas, where I was living at the time, I said, they got a brand new little Marriott down the street. I said, if you'll bring them to Midlothian, Texas, I will train them. He said, okay. I didn't know what okay meant. He hung up. He called me a week later and he said, I'm going to do it. You're going to do what? He said, I'm bringing 30 officers to Midlothian, Texas, and I don't know where it is. But we're bringing them from South Korea for you to train them because your company is the only company in the world that knows how to do this. And I said, are you serious? And he said, yes. And I said, well, then I'm committed. I said, we're going to have a 5-day class. And I want you to know that he did send them. You were correct. We had a wonderful time. It was an emotional time for me because it was my last official training I was going to do for the Army on the topic before I went off into the sunset. And it was an emotional time for them because we got to talk about a lot of things they didn't understand. And what was interesting is every one of them had all of their soldiers surveyed before they came. So we had several hundred surveys because of these 30 officers. And this was the saddest part of this story that you just brought up. And I hadn't even thought about this, Derek, until you brought it up. A long time. I covered what we knew were the most obvious suicidal survey patterns the morning, about a Wednesday morning of that 5-day class. Started on Monday. And after lunch, one of the officers came to me and he said, Mr. Nance, can I say something to the class? And I sure can. He said, well, that pattern that you told us was suicidal, it was a tugboat, which if you read our book, you'll know what a tugboat is. He said, I had that pattern that you put on the board this morning. And he said, I just got word that he killed himself today. I said, let me get this straight. I told you of one of the propensity patterns of suicide this morning. And one of your soldiers that has this pattern killed himself. He said, yes, sir, with a time change, it was last night in South Korea. Well, they got my attention, but it got everybody's attention in the class because it verified what I was talking about. So I don't know how many of you are going to watch this. I don't know how many of you are going to care. I don't know how many are going to believe it. It's all okay with me. But I wanted to get it off my chest because this has been bothering me as I'm watching the media and the news and reading the stories about what a bunch of garbage this is about these numbers. They're not right numbers. Nobody wants you to have the right numbers. And nobody wants to tell you that the Army had a chance to see some of this stuff up close and personal. And so, please, take this serious. Take this serious. Protect your children. If you're going to go in the Army or the Marine Corps especially, make sure that you're having some of these discussions with them, with the people that you're fixing to entrust them to before you make some final decisions. And if you happen to know a politician that you could trust that has any influence in Washington, tell them. Yeah. This is something that ought to be talked about. You had something else you wanted to ask about, was there? What was it?
I just had the stats here if you want to share some of these stats from everything that we've been discussing today.
Well, the first 7,000 soldiers that we looked at, there were 75,000, so the first 10%. Just the first group of the first 7,000, we found that we had 12% were high risk for suicide. Now, when you have 12% of a population, just out of the first 1,000 or 7,000 people that's at risk for suicide, does that cause a problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that goes back to the recruiting I'm talking about. And then what we found is that in everybody that we started to see suicide attempts and or later committed suicide after surveying them, they had financial issues and drug or alcohol issues. You see, people that are struggling with the suicidal issues usually need some firewater or something to get their nerve up, but they also have already been doing it during their messed up life. See, when you talk about attitude just doesn't happen one morning. You've either been obese or on drugs or alcohol, or you got financial problems or credit card problems. Those tend to be issues of people that have suicide tendencies. And so this is why I get upset when I hear people say, well, we had a suicide conference. Well, what did you talk about? What did you talk about? Well, we talked about how bad it is. We talked about stats. Mm-hmm. We talked about we're going to take up money in our nonprofit and make it a new promotional program. Well, I don't care about that. I want to know if you're going to have a meeting. Do you know how to identify in your company, your organization, or the military who's at risk for suicide? And do you have a training program to help them? Yeah. And if you don't, you're wasting time and money, both at the federal level, the state level, and the corporate level. So that's just an example. Now, I've told you in summary, almost 17% of the military leaders we surveyed were not good military leaders and shouldn't be military leaders. I told you that almost 26% of the soldiers in the military that we surveyed were high-risk soldiers to do something stupid and shouldn't have been recruited. Now, when you put those two stats together, that's over 40%. So do we have an issue? Guys, what do you think? Do we have an issue?
Absolutely, we do.
Yes, for sure.
And then I told you today that you have 9 times chance more to die from suicide in the military active today than you do to be killed in combat. Other than that, everything's fine. So guys, before I close out my section on this Army discussion today, what is it that maybe I haven't covered that we've talked about or that needs to be discussed?
You've discussed the majority of it for my part. I was almost one of those statistics. I put a gun in my mouth 3 times after my divorce, psychiatric care, all the things. This system is one of the systems that got me out of all that. You don't have to stay where you are. reallifemanagement.com, take the 3-minute survey, get the free summary, reach out to us through our contact form or whatever that looks like for your environment. We want to help you guys. And like I said, I'm a walking billboard for what the system does. Wayne, did you have anything else?
Well, I think the issue that cracks me up a lot, we have a free, I wrote all of those reports that are on the 3-minute survey when you take it online. I wrote the free report that's the 1 page that you don't have to spend any money. And then I wrote you one that's a lot better, a lot more thorough. It's like $25 we're selling it for. And people will say to me today, well, you know, I don't want to pay $25 to know what's wrong with my attitude. Well, you probably don't.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you probably spent $25 on a Mexican meal with some people this week.
Yeah.
You probably spent $25 on 2 whiskeys on the rocks.
Yeah.
Okay? But I would not ever spend $25 to know how to improve my life, would you?
No.
And so when people say, well, I guess you just want to get rich. Well, I'm going to be real honest with you. After doing this for almost 50 years and putting several $1 million of it, my own money in research, I doubt if your $25 is going to make me rich, I can assure you.
Yeah.
But the reason I still do this as an old guy at 75 years old is I'm trying to talk some common sense into people every week when we talk about topics. Just a little common sense. Mm-hmm. You know, I asked yesterday, I was at lunch and I got on that fuzzy bunny. I mean that, what bunny is it? Bad bunny? You know, in the Army we called them fuzzy bunnies and a bag of pudding. But anyway, but so Bad Bunny, I don't know what it means. I guess he's the baddest guy in a dress. I don't know. But anyway, so I asked this 21 or 22-year-old waiter that I had at an Italian restaurant. I said, look, I got to ask you about this guy, Bad Bunny. I said, I know that I'm out of touch at my age. And I said, I want to ask an opinion of somebody that's in that age group. And I said, what is your thought about this dude wearing a dress, you know, calling himself Bad Bunny? He said, well, Mr. Nance, he said, it isn't really an age thing. He said, anybody with common sense would know this is stupid. God, that was refreshing to have a 21-year-old say that. But he said, what you've got to understand is that over there in Puerto Rico and where he's from, he's their Elvis Presley. Yeah. And of course, I couldn't help myself. I said, I guess he's all shook up. But anyway, so I want you to know that it was so refreshing to see a 21-year-old say to me, it's just common sense. It don't make sense. So if you've got a comment you want to, I know nowadays, you know, when I had my Fox radio show, everybody call in. I had a 2-hour call-in show, and I get to argue with everybody right there on the spot. Well, now with these what did you call this thing we're doing?
They call it a podcast.
Oh, podcast.
Okay. We call it a broadcast or a show.
Okay. Well, I can't get immediate response from you. You get to hide behind the typewriter there. You don't have typewriter. Typewriter computer.
Showing your age.
Yeah, what do they call it? Keyboard.
Keyboard.
The keyboard warrior. You get to give your opinion and hide. You don't even have to talk. So if you got one, whether you agree with me or disagree, I want to hear about it. I just want to hear from you. I just want to know you exist. And I know that texting and emailing and all that's called communication. In my day, communication is where you talk to humans. And I know that's way out of, it don't matter anymore. But as we close out today, do you guys have anything you want to say? Because I don't want to feel like I've been stealing this discussion.
No, I think it's good. I appreciate you sharing, Mr. Wayne.
Absolutely. What a great testimony. What a great story. What a great system.
Yeah.
And so can we get our numbers up a little bit? Will you go tell a friend, make the old guy happy?
We want to see 4 people this week.
Yeah. I want this.
We want to double the ratings.
Well, yeah, we want our ratings off the chart. Hey, it was fun being with you. This is Wayne Nance, CEO of Real Life Management. This was hopefully something that you can benefit from. Now, I got good news for you. We're not going to have such an unserious or serious topic every week. Because next week, I think I may talk about obesity. We're going to talk about obesity and why we're fat and why we stay fat. We're going to talk about why we're broke, why we stay broke. That's just going to be a couple of upcoming topics. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about fat. We're going to talk about parenting. We're going to talk about bad parenting. We're going to talk about spouses and how to deal with them, who to get married to, who not. Boy, we're going to have some fun or what?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I know if you've had 3 marriages already, you pick 3 losers, but I will leave you with this. If you pick 3 losers, your picker's broke. Hey, good to see y'all. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you next week. Over and out. Oh, and one more thing. Remember my favorite saying. Today's choices is tomorrow's what you're stuck with. See ya. Bye.
My name is Derek. Thanks for joining us today on our podcast. I want to encourage you guys to check out our website at reallifemanagement.com and take our 3-minute survey. We want to learn more about your attitude so we can connect to you, and we want someone to reach out to you about health, wealth, and relationships. So if you would, follow us on social media and stay connected so we can learn more together. See you soon.